Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined by awesome co-hosts Laura Nash. How are you doing, Laura?
I am excited to talk longer than the game takes to play.
Oh, at least twice as long, no question. And Nate Heininger. How are you doing, Nate?
Well, I just finished playing this, and I somehow feel less prepared to talk about it than I did before playing it. So I am ready.
We're
I
all
am here.
professionals, folks.
Indeed. And so this week we're talking about 30 Flights of Loving. 30 Flights of Loving has come up on this show before. It is a 2012, I guess, first-person adventure game is a way to put it. Or first-person...
Someone tried to call it a shooter, and I think that's just because you move the mouse to change your viewpoint. And I think that's all it has in common with shooters.
It's built on the Quake engine, so it's got to be a shooter. So we talked about this before because we did an episode on the sequel, a pseudo-sequel to this game, Quadrilateral Cowboy. And we've also talked about it a little bit on the episode we did on Virginia, which was heavily inspired by this game. But 30 Flights of Loving is one of those games that just consistently comes up. If you're reading about short narrative games, this is a touch point. This game came out in 2012, and it still comes up practically every time you have a conversation online about this sort of sub-niche of video games.
And we've had also just... shout out to our listeners. We've had this game requested many times, I think for exactly the reasons that Reagan pointed out. So I'm glad that we are finally talking about it.
So, and like I said, we have talked about it just a little bit before, but mostly with relation to like how it influenced other games, or just in the context of later games that kind of drew on its influence. But 30 Flights of Loving is a really interesting little game in and of itself. Probably one of the most interesting things about it is just that we're talking about short games. This game is 15 minutes long. This is an extraordinarily short game that packs an enormous punch for its size.
It may be the shortest game we've done. This might be the shortest short game. There's the Dr. Stanislav,
the
tiger.
Dr.
Langislav.
And
the tiger diamond,
an unusually large
emerald,
right? Something like that. Yeah, whatever that was called. That was phenomenal. And actually,
a wonderful game that we're mangling.
Yeah, but yeah, this one is a extraordinarily short game. To put it in some context, this is a game by Blendo Games, which is basically a one-man development studio. That's Brendan Chung's development studio. He's done a few other games. He had a couple of games before this. I actually was not really, and still haven't really played any of his stuff that came before 30 Flights of Loving, although this is actually the sequel to a game that he put out called Gravity Bone, which was much more... linear narrative, but similar in a lot of ways. It's a primarily narrative-driven first-person game with this sort of blocky, big square head visual art style. And actually, it shares a protagonist. So this is a direct sequel, or kind of probably more of a prequel, from what I understand, of Gravity Bone. Gravity Bone, by the way, is included if you buy this game. It is part of the download, so you get both Gravity Bone and this. But this is a short story in video game form. And I think that's really a good sort of distillation of what this is all about. This is using film and sort of short story narrative techniques to tell a story, but just totally smashing that together with a video game form.
Yeah, and before we get too far into the details, I just want to say up front, normally we do sort of a spoiler break in these episodes, but this game is 15 minutes long, and it's from 2012. If you're really worried about us spoiling it, go play it. Like, whatever you're doing right now, you probably can go and spend 15 minutes playing this game. Play it and come back, because I don't think we can not not spoil this game in any of the
yeah.
conversation. So if you're worried about that, I understand. Just go play it. And then if not, keep listening, but we're not going to try to divide.
Yeah, like a lot of different types of media where you're mixing a lot of different time periods. There's smash cuts. There's lots of non-linear storylines. To talk about why it's non-linear or how it's non-linear is the game. That's the entire thing. It's not even like an interactive fiction game where you can describe the whole narrative, but the choices will change because you experience it, but it is on rails
It is almost entirely, essentially, on rails. So, yeah we're going to be talking about essentially the game is 15 minutes long. We're going to be talking about essentially everything in it, probably.
We run into this problem a lot with all narrative games. It's really hard to draw that line, because a lot of them you can just say, well, you're a person and you're learning about a story.
You're exploring a place.
You could say that
walking down hallways.
Yeah, exactly. Firewatch, Virginia, all of these games that we love could just be boiled down to that. But normally there's a little bit more gameplay than kind of holding forward and hitting E.
I'll say that this is a little less intentionally surreal as Virginia, if that's something that you were... It was divisive. I say that because I was divisive on it. I liked some parts. I didn't like some parts. It's not as if like suddenly you walk into a room and there's a melting clock, but there are things that are going to be jumping through time, or kind of you walk to a certain point and there's a cut.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those time distillations, the tesseracts, as it were.
Nice.
This is a game that like really, really trusts you as the player to put the pieces together yourself. So, obviously we're going to get into the story itself in a minute, but like this is a game that does not hand you its story. There's no voiceover. There's almost no text in the game. What text there is mostly in the forms of like signs. So this is a game that has definitely a story and characters, but you are really kind of on your own to discover them by reading context, by reading setting, by kind of interpreting from action. And the scenes are presented in this sort of out of sequence way that it feels very film-like, feels almost... I don't know what film really... Like, I don't really have a good touch point film to kind of compare this to, I guess.
It's a spy movie, but
Yeah.
the boring parts are cut.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they cut all the parts where people are planning the heist. You just get, like, bits and pieces of the heist. It's like if you got hit in the head right after a spy movie, and then you tried to... Like, you lost
Remember all
most
the
of your
parts.
memory, and then you tried to explain it to a friend.
Yeah, that's great.
Or like a YouTube slice and dice where you like put a spy movie in a blender and you could only pull out the chunks that were, now it's film in a blender, but you could just pull out the little chunks and put it together in YouTube, and you said that was your fan fiction. Like, it's that kind of thing. There's just like odd bits in wrong order.
Yeah, so if you think back to like 2012, like this style of gameplay, this style of storytelling in games was extremely uncommon. That's, I think, why this game persists in the sort of video game, taco sphere the way that it does. This is
Wait,
tacos.
Did you say taco sphere?
Yeah, he's at the taco sphere, and I
was trying to... The word I was trying to reach for was
Water
video game
cooler?
discourse, but it's like
The
the
taco
tacos.
sphere. Yeah.
Taco
Right.
sphere.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
like a weapon with a taco on the end of it.
I'm not arguing or saying it was a bad word choice. I just was making sure that I heard taco sphere correctly.
Okay. I'm gonna verbally place those hyphens. Talk-o-sphere. It's
Much better.
It was kind of controversial when it first came out. A lot of people didn't really like it. 2012, we're talking 5 years ago, even before this podcast came out and revolutionized video games forever. This was this is a 15-minute game that costs $5 on Steam. And that is a weird thing even today. 15-minute long games are incredibly uncommon. But not just that. This is I don't want to call it linear, because actually the story is told in an extremely non-linear way, but it's also not primarily about gameplay. It's a story-driven game, so it's got a kind of a through line that you are following, and your goal, your job as the player, is not so much to make decisions about the story or, really even kind of decide on how the action is going to progress. Your job as the player is to piece together these fragments of narrative to figure out what happened. Yeah, in a similar kind of way, it's like if you're playing something like Gone Home, where you're piecing together a narrative from chunks of from the detritus of a house. Here, you're piecing together those narratives from little tiny story fragments.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple things that come to mind. First of all, there's no in-game reward or like redemption or anything for solving it. You could just basically hold forward and make it to the end of the game and not ever figure it out, and it would still end the same way. And you're not triggering anything. Like you mentioned Gone Home, and that it's true in that you're like figuring things out. But Gone Home has sort of a progression. You get into rooms, new things happen, and you're like told new bits. This is just, you're just being pushed through it. And the other thing one of the other things that sort of sticks out to me too in this game, unlike a lot of the games that came after it, like Virginia and maybe like Unfinished Swan and some of that stuff, they're purposely trying to make you interpret like concepts and like theory and like what happened, why did this happen, what does that mean, what does that buffalo or bison right in the middle of the street mean. This game, I think something very definite happened and is happening. It's your job as the player to just figure out what specifically happened. I don't think there's a lot of like necessarily, there's a little bit, but it's not a whole lot of like weird imagery. It's just like,
this ain't the Great Gatsby. You're not trying to figure out what the symbols mean the whole time.
It's just a thing, an experience happened for the player character that you're playing, and as the video game player, you're going through it with them, and it's jump cutty and strange, but it's not surreal. So I don't know. I think that's really interesting, and I think it lends itself to replaying in a way that is more fun to me than the replaying to like figure out what that bison meant. If that makes sense.
It's also fun because the randomness, if you think about context, would make perfect sense. Like there's an entire section where someone is just sitting and peeling oranges and flicking them. And there's another part where there's just a billion cats on the stairs. And when you cut to those scenes, you're like, what is happening? This person I just saw holding a gun a second ago is just calmly peeling oranges and flicking them on a balcony. It seems like a really weird thing to do. And then you kind of move through the scene and you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is a different time period. Maybe, you actually start piecing it together a bit and you realize that it's disquieting or disconcerting or not what you expected, but it is a totally normal scene. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make sense. It just wasn't at all what you thought was going to happen next.
Well, it's funny because I feel so like prepped for those things. So it's like her sitting there peeling oranges. I was like, ooh, oranges. That's a movie trope for like death is coming, right? Like the Godfather, and then Requiem for a Dream. They all do that. There's oranges, and it's like, no, it might also just be it was a memory of her, and it happened to be that she was eating oranges at that time.
At the beginning of playing it, I was looking around rooms looking for like hidden things to pick up or find or read, and I realized that's not this game.
They actually set you up because you can drink all the bottles of like liquor in the first room.
Yeah, you can just take them all.
The first thing I did in the game was find and drink every single like bottle of liquor in the room, and I'm like, ooh, like this is gonna be something. I was like, no, it's just, you can do that, I guess.
Yeah, I think this like this is not, despite the sort of like disjointed, sometimes confusing narrative style, this is not like a David Lynch type of thing. Virginia maybe is, but like this is not. I think this sort of falls more in the kind of like Tarantino or Guy Ritchie kind of style. Like this is it's an action story. It's a story about a crime taking place. It's a heist that takes place entirely off screen. So, we're seeing the prep for the heist, and then we're seeing the aftermath of the heist, and we're seeing these flashbacks to like what brought us here. But it's a heist movie where there's no heist. But it has that heist or sort of crime movie drive to it. It's not something that's standing still. It moves along at a clip for all 15 minutes. And then you can go back and play it again and pick up some of those details. So the very first time that I played this game, I actually didn't like it almost at all. And that's kind of a weird thing to say about something that on the show I'm saying you should absolutely play this game. But the first time that I played this game, I got this feeling with it where I was like, I got to the end of it, and I was like, wait, first of all, that was all? It was only 15 minutes? And I hadn't figured it out. I got to the end of the game and it hadn't clicked for me. The story didn't make sense yet. And that gave me this really uncomfortable feeling. Like, I remember coming to the end of it and being like, that's not right. I should be able to figure this out by the end of the game, and they didn't tell me anything. What's going on? And I realized, like, I get this weird feeling of kind of inadequacy when I play something that I can tell is good, but or is like artistic or is like interesting, but that I can't understand. And that just deeply bothered me the first time that I played it through. But then I went and played it through again. And I've ultimately now played the game at least 5 or 6 times. It's only 15 minutes. That's not a big time commitment. By the second or third time that I played through it, I focused on those later playthroughs on trying to sort out the story and specifically trying to decide, okay, what of these scenes is like active current events of the, what's the present, and what are flashbacks, and what are those flashbacks telling me about the story. And I think we could kind of transition over to talking a little bit about the specifics of the story and specific scenes. But like, that's the key, I think, to this game is like, pay attention, try to be able to tell what is the present and what is a flashback. And that kind of opens up a lot of the story for you.
Kind of like Her Story, when you learn to look at different details, and that the game is not going to tell you which details are important and which details are worth tracking. Mm-hmm. It's up to you to figure out what details mean something and what is just a different camera angle.
Yeah. So if we're going to jump into the story, I just want to pitch to you guys, because I very recently played it. And I play games with a general sort of analytic view, but I also want to just experience it for the first time. So here's what I think happened, but I don't think I'm right.
Okay.
So
I cannot wait for this.
I don't think it's I think it's a good theory, but I can't imagine that I got it right on the first time. So, but for the sake of the show, I thought this would be, fun. So at the end, you're in a car accident, right? And so my thought is that the game is the last. It's like, what they say, like when you die, it's like all the scenes that play through in your head of like your whole life. But this is like the character's dying in the accident and is thinking about all of the stuff that led up in this sort of heist that happened and went wrong. And that's what he or she, I think it's a guy, that's like what he's thinking is like, oh, it's just like a bam, 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 bam of all the things that went wrong and has led to this moment, and then it's the end of the game. So that's my theory. You guys can tell me.
Yeah, I think that's actually that's not. I definitely think that's not wrong in a sense, because like I do think that final car accident is sort of like I do think the character. It's a bit of a tricky thing to say, because I do think the character dies in that moment, but also this is supposed to be a prequel to the other game, so the player character is supposed to be. I don't think it matters so much, but I do think that's the end of Citizen Abel's life. He's called that apparently. I don't think it mentions it in the game, but this is the Citizen Abel series. But like, I do think that's the end of his life, or at least the end of the game. That's certainly the last moment chronologically of the game. But I do think there's like present stuff. There's like present active moments before that. It's not all flashback until we get to that, I don't think.
Yeah, that's where I think I'm probably wrong. Is I think you're like when you were talking about that earlier in the show, and I was thinking about it, like it does seem to have current and past, and then the game ends, like the narrative ends with the car accident. It just felt like you could interpret even the current time as the past, and the only true current time is like the accident.
Since the game is only 15 minutes, I don't think it's that crazy for us to just like walk through it basically in sequence. Yeah. The game opens with you, the player character, kind of going into a bar, and underneath the bar is a kind of a secret hideout. And there's some great details that you can pick up there in the bar and in that hideout if you take the time to really explore. This all takes place in Brendan Chung's sort of consistent universe. And so it's a very weird world. It's not our world. Everybody has giant cube heads. But on top of that, it's kind of this like weird sort of future retro. So it's in a country called Nuevo Aires. And you can tell from the bar, based on signs, that there's a prohibition on alcohol.
I think we called this like Soviet punk or like communist punk during Quadrilateral Cowboy, because like things are futuristic but also very industrial and kind of ghetto, but like in the Soviet Russia weirdness way.
Definitely.
It's like in an early Bond movie, if like the cool technology that he gets from Q and is like super crazy technology is just kind of how the world works. Like everyone just has these like weird little gadgets, and everything's like kind of techno, like technology based, but all like weird purposeful gadgets.
Yeah, Quadrilateral Cowboy called it, I think, 20th century cyberpunk, which is to say like it's cyberpunk but also it's the 80s or something.
There's a sign. You're talking about the prohibition sign. It says, failure to keep this establishment free of alcohol will result in penalty of quesomancy, which I'm assuming.
God, I want to know what that means.
Cheesemancy?
Yeah. Oh God, you don't want to get the cheese wizards on your ass.
I don't know.
Quesomancers are the worst.
But I mean that doesn't. There's worse types of mancy. I mean, if it's gonna be, I'm all right with cheesemancy.
Oh no, you haven't seen Misfits. You do not want cheesemancy.
Oh no, I have seen Misfits. I had thought about that.
Also, the sign says this license expires November 16th, 1963, which I think, given that this is part of the same sort of world as Quadrilateral Cowboy, which is set in the 80s, kind of explains how some of the technology of this game seems a little more antiquated as compared to Quadrilateral Cowboy, because it's 20 years earlier. So you enter this bar, and you turn a portrait on the wall, and you open a secret passage, and you're down in a secret hidden room below the bar. This seems to be the hideout for our three main characters, the player character and two other characters. And the way that it introduces these characters is just like visually one of my favorite things that they do in the game. You walk up to, there's two characters waiting down here in this hideout, cleaning their guns or whatever. And when you click on either one of them, you get these like smash cut versions of like seeing who these people are with these gigantic letters just spelling out, so we can see that Anita is a demolitions expert, a sharpshooter, a mechanic, a confectioner. And for each of those words, you see her engaged in that activity. She's blowing shit up. She's shooting things while hanging from a rope on the side of a building. She's fixing a plane. She's baking a cake or presenting it. And then your other character, Borges, forger, safecracker, pilot, best man.
And it cuts into like him standing at a wedding. It's so funny. This you said it earlier. I had the same thought about like a Guy Ritchie movie. Like this fits like right at home with a movie like that. You introduce a character and it's like boom, 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 boom. Like a 4-second cut about their entire life. It gives you a real good sense of the character, and also it's the first sort of thing that really happens in the game. The bar is just like a entry, and this is your first like, oh, okay, so this is gonna be a an action sort of game.
Yeah, and you can tell from all the stuff that's around that they're planning something. They're planning. It feels like a criminal space, right? You're in a hidden room. The hidden room has a bunch of guns and bullets, but also blueprints and plans and books, and passports, fake IDs, everything that you would need to commit some sort of unnamed heist. It never fully explains what it is, although I kind of get the sense that given the prohibition and the fact that they've got tons and tons of booze, that it's some kind of like booze running operation, but it's never completely explained what the heist or operation they're preparing for is.
Yeah, and bless this game, Anita is wearing what only looks like a barista apron, which when you think about it, works for both of her demolitions expert and her confectioner thing. She's just wearing this like very green and white. It's perfect. I just laughed really hard over that.
Excellent point.
You can also push some ducks off of a ledge.
And there's a water plane down there. They've got a little enclosed sort of waterlogged room where they are keeping their gigantic water plane that looks exactly like the plane from like Tailspin. It's awesome. Something else that I didn't notice the first time I played through, but that if you're playing the game, and I mean, we're spoiling stuff right now, right? So Anita has a robotic arm and leg. She has lost an arm and a leg at some point. And in this very first scene, she's already missing them, and she's got them replaced with some sort of little robot arm and leg. And I mentioned earlier that like it took me a couple of playthroughs before I kind of like started figuring out what is the present of this game and what is the past, and that detail was the key for me, because in some scenes you see Anita with all of her limbs, and in other later scenes like this one we see her with these prosthetic limbs, and I think that's probably the most obvious visual way to tell like what is current events. I believe like if the game has a narrative that's going forward in time and is punctuated by flashbacks, we're starting in the hideout, and we're starting with Anita already post accident. So if you're seeing Anita with her missing arm and leg, we're probably in the present. And if we're seeing Anita before she lost her arm and leg, we're probably in a flashback.
Yeah, I did not catch that, but that makes a lot of sense.
I noticed it actually halfway through the game and was like, oh, wonder what other scenes she didn't have.
Yeah. Too late to interpret that one.
Yep.
Too late. I was like, that was probably the clue. That was the clue that I noticed. I'm 7 minutes into a 15-minute game.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I didn't get that at all the first time, and I don't think I really got it until like my halfway through my second playthrough, and I've played through the game like 5 times now. So, after we set out on the plane, everybody boards the plane. You're clearly ready to go on your heist, right? And you immediately get this smash cut, which is the most film-like smash cut in the game. Instantly, after the plane is beginning to take off, you're in a room that just seems to be full of boxes, and Anita has been shot. She's covered in blood, and she's holding a gun pointed at you and pulling the trigger, and it's not firing because presumably she's out of bullets. And there's Voorhees as well, and he is also wounded and probably dying in this room in what later seems to be an airport. So you're jumping from we're preparing for the heist to everybody is practically dead and Anita is trying to kill you, but she doesn't have any bullets. Like, what happened in that time between, we don't really know. The game never really gives us enough clues to really tell, but something clearly went crazy wrong with the heist. And so the rest of the game's, I think, sort of forward momentum of like forward in time plot progression is escaping after the heist. You're in an airport. And, in order to get out of the room, you have to pick up Voorhees, kind of throw him over your shoulder, and you're trying to escape the airport, which is full of people and full of these weird sort of floating drones with guns. And you're trying to escape. But all the while you're escaping, you're experiencing these flashbacks to sort of how did I get here? Yeah.
And in the airport, there are some fantastic wanted displays that show up for Winston Borges.
It's a really
where
cool scene. Yeah, you're like running down the middle, and the hallway is full left and right of all the like blinking wanted signs. Very dramatic.
It's by the Department of Retribution, so wanted for armed robbery, conspiracy, forgery, and bootlegging. And then at the bottom, there's just a list of aliases, and they're all wonderful. Of course, you're running down a hall with a guy on a luggage cart, but my favorite one was probably the Petulant Eerie.
Nice. Yeah, I stopped and read those too, but it's very dramatic.
So your escape from the airport is punctuated by these flashbacks, and I mean, those are where you really learn about the characters and how they got into this mess, right? So, you've got a scene of Anita that you mentioned earlier, Anita peeling oranges, sitting in a hotel with just sort of mattresses on the floor, peeling oranges along with her. You pick up an orange and you peel it and you eat it. And then later there's a scene that it flashes back to of you and Anita and Borges going to a wedding. You're in that same building, kind of going upstairs from that building to a wedding. My favorite scene of the game is the wedding scene. You and Anita and Borges go up these long, winding stairs to the roof.
Stairs.
Yeah. And
30 flights of loving, you might say.
I think it's...
I don't know.
You don't climb 30
It's not
flights
30
for sure, but
yeah.
I think that's got to be it, right? Like,
I mean, you're on a balcony, so you're high up, and then you go up another 6 floors. So maybe the roof's on the 30th floor.
And I think the loving is that it's full of cats. It's the 30 flights.
You weird cat dad.
Just the only way I could ever the guy had the writer of this game has such a unique language. It's such a funny way with words. And I was thinking the only way I would ever string those sentences together, 30 flights of loving, is if I did encounter 30 staircases full of cats, I might actually say, this is 30 flights of loving as I go up it. So that's the only thing I can think of.
It did not occur to me.
Surreal cats.
Did not occur to me, but those angular box-like cats were indeed very loving.
They were. They chased you with their meows.
Mm-hmm. And the scene
at the
scene at the top of the, once you reach the top of the stairs, you're attending some kind of a wedding, presumably the one where Borges is the best man. And
such good dancing at this wedding.
Oh man.
Great
and
dancing.
He leaves you alone with Anita, and there's this scene of you and Anita just drinking and drinking and drinking. Lots of smash cuts as suddenly more or jump cuts, I suppose would be the correct term for those, and where more and more
you pick up a bottle, and then when you start putting it down, it's a different bottle. You pick up another bottle, and they just keep
suddenly
morphing
there's
into another.
30 bottles on the table, and Anita's face is getting drunker and drunker. And you see the everybody's dancing except you and Anita, and this is one of my favorite sort of visuals in the game. Is the dancers are kind of swirling around each other, and suddenly they start to kind of flow upwards in a weird kind of tower of dancers, reaching higher and higher as they kind of hover off of the ground. Something I love about that is that this game has a director's commentary, and basically what that means is you can play through it with these little nodes that you can click on to get some details that Brendan Chung wrote about the game. In all honesty, it's not the best director's commentary I've seen in video games like this. First of all, there's no voiceover and these are all read, but a lot of them are just sort of him telling you things like, I really would have liked to do it this way, but I couldn't figure out how. But something he said about this scene that I love is that he said this was a happy accident. I was trying to write a generator to just have folks kind of bob up and down as they were dancing, and it was broken, and they started sort of flowing upwards off of the ground, and he realized that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. Ship it.
Yeah, that's great.
I love that. And that's where things seem to kind of start to turn sad. Obviously, this is all these scenes are tiny, short scenes interspersed with escaping from the airport with Borges on a cart, right?
Yeah, at one point, flinging, there's a gate lowering.
Oh, that was great.
And somehow you fling Borges sideways and directly under the gate so that it lowers and, hits the cart you've been pushing him in so you can, crawl under it, too. It's very spy action movie. It's pretty funny.
Everything about this is, super, heightened 60s rad spy action movie style. That was great. That was a great moment. And that's just before the big gunfight as well, which I guess we'll talk about. But out of that wedding, the one thing that's I I think important to understanding the story of the game was that like when you first walk into the wedding, there's this woman standing there who has a red streak in her hair in the front. Anita does not have that. They're all cube heads, so it's kind of hard to distinguish them. But like this red streak in their hair woman is a stranger. And, you know, you get drunk at the wedding with Anita, but very short. And then it shows you leaving the wedding, following Anita back to the apartment. But then you're back in the apartment and there's another woman there, and it's the woman from the wedding with the red streak in her hair. So it seems like while you're at the wedding, oh, this is like romantic. The player character and Anita have something going on, but then suddenly you're with this other woman that you met at the wedding. It's hard to really place, but I'm pretty sure Anita gets her heart broken. You know, something's wrong in that.
You were criminal buddies sharing your apartment together. She thought that this might, or I interpreted that they were together, but maybe just loosely together, and then you hooked up with someone.
Yeah, that like cool 60s spy movie together, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm my
They're
own
like,
man.
we're not going to
and
talk
you're-
about
yeah,
things.
and you're your own woman, but we live together. And
We're just going to casually eat oranges and sleep on mattresses on the floor and be extremely bohemian and cool.
Of course. And go to a wedding, and instead of dancing like those plebeians, you're just going to get really, really sloshed.
Extremely drunk.
Oh, no.
So yeah, the present story of the game continues with you escaping the airport. There's a big shootout in which you don't do any of the shooting. You're pushing Borges around on his cart, and he's shooting the drones for you in what I guess would be the closest thing this game has to a boss battle, even though it's actually punctuated by jump cuts and suddenly, oh, I guess they're all dead.
and sometimes you follow the bullet, like the
Oh
camera
man, you're
goes-
right.
Yeah.
That was the first scene where they used that. They used it a couple of other times after that. I love that shot.
Yeah, at first I was like, oh, I'm controlling the bullet. Oh no, I gotta hit the guy, and I'm like, wait, this isn't that type of game, you know?
I was doing that too. I was like, what? I can't. I
I
don't think I'm
missed.
aiming properly.
Yeah,
There's so many
oh.
like gorgeous shots in this game. Like whenever it takes you out of first person, which it does almost never, it's to do something absolutely beautifully filmic and cool. Like the sort of like following the bullet as it flies towards its target shot, or the shots when when it's introducing the two characters at the start and it does those weird little jump cuts to to tell you who they are, or
yeah, it's all stuff we're used to seeing in films, like artfully shot films where they stick a camera on an angle you wouldn't expect, like at the end of a bat or something, when the Roger Deakins sort of thing, where just everything is shot from an angle you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, and this is an
normally follow the bullet.
artfully modern, incredibly tightly edited, artfully shot film in the Quake 2 engine. Like that's cool.
It's a montage film.
Yeah, and so I guess continuing on with the story, they, if you finally escape the, I guess one sort of final important flashback moment that you get as you're shooting these drones out of the sky is you flash back to a scene where you're riding on the back of a motorcycle and Anita is on the front, and Borges is on a separate motorcycle, and you're driving the wrong way down the freeway, and Anita looks back at you, and there's literal hearts like rising from her head as she looks back away from the road and back at you, and suddenly, almost out of nowhere, you have a head-on collision with a truck, and it cuts away. So my assumption, and I don't know if this is accurate for sure, but my assumption is that that's how Anita lost her arm and her leg, that you two were together, that this scene with the motorcycles was happening a long time ago, and that she lost her arm and her leg, presumably in a motorcycle accident that you were also in. And possibly she resents you for that. I don't know. Maybe she resents you for that, and also for sleeping with that other woman.
Don't drive on the wrong side of the highway.
Very good advice.
Even if you are a super cool spy.
Yeah.
Or whatever you are. Smuggler.
Whatever you are.
You're whatever you want to be. You don't have a description.
Yeah, that's true.
Your Citizen Abel, it never really does describe anything about the main character. And unlike Quadrilateral Cowboy, where you can like look in a mirror, there's no opportunity to do that in this game. So you really don't know. I mean, I guess you don't even really know what Citizen Abel's gender is, or
You're the protagonist of a spy movie. You're the one who gets away.
Yeah,
You're fine.
Maybe.
So I guess the sort of final scenes of the game, once you finally make it out of the airport with Borges on his cart, you go out into this space that is like a pure pink or sort of magenta void filled with cop cars. That's a really kind of cool visual, and also it's a great shortcut to not have to do a fully realized outdoor scene. But like, it's this very cool looking view of like, you can tell you're surrounded by cop cars and you're in panic mode because all you can see are cop cars and magenta. And somehow you manage to get away because it jump cuts to you escaping in a car that is also in this sort of magenta void. You're being pursued by police cars. You're shooting back at them. It does another one of those cool bullet follow shots. And just as you're escaping from the cops in this sort of driving sequence in this sort of pure magenta void, another brief flashback of the moment on the motorcycle when the motorcycle impacted the car, and then it immediately cuts back to what I assume is the present, and you get into yet another car wreck. And that, as far as I can tell, is the end of the game. That car wreck ends the game. Now, it actually kind of ejects you from the car into the credits, which are in the form of a museum, which is really cool and innovative in and of itself. I love the way this game presented its kind of credit sequence.
Yes, and I have so the museum, it has these like little tiny little examples of experiments about lift and how
Bernoulli's principle.
And how wings work and how flying works. And I think this was part of why I thought that the game was what I thought it was, is because this is teaching about what it means when things are flying through the air. And so your character is flying through the air, thinking about all the things that went wrong to lead to him to be in this situation of being, midair flung from his car.
I like that.
I got to the point when I saw that, I was like, oh, they're doing lift principles. I was like, about flights. And I was like, oh man, are there 30 references to flight buried in here? I was like, no, those were full bottles. They weren't like...
Yeah, we've already established it's cat stairs.
It's cat stairs.
It's cat stairs.
Yeah.
I'm that is canon. Seal it in cement. Put it in the video game Hall of Fame. Write it on TV tropes.
Catstairs.com.
Cat stairs.
So that's pretty much the end of the game, with one exception. So you play through the credit sequence is a museum full of exhibits, most of which, apart from those sort of exhibits on Bernoulli's principles of lift, are actually just the credits of the game. They're little paintings and little structures, kind of showing the name of the game, the name of the people involved, and so on. But like, there's a kind of a final shot after you kind of leave the museum where you're back on that bike with Anita, and the sun is setting in the distance, and that moment kind of goes on forever until you hit escape. And so I think, that's that sort of like last perfect moment, that moment before the accident, before Anita was injured, before things went wrong with the heist. That sort of like, and I thought that was a wonderful moment to end on, that sort of like last perfect moment as I guess he's probably dead. But that's his last memory.
Before his body smashed into the pavement.
Gross.
Well, I'm really glad that we played this. And I recommend it definitely to anyone who hasn't.
Yeah. It's like really worth playing through, because even if it's not something that like particularly like yanks your crank in terms of like how you appreciate games.
Real graphic.
Hey, here in the taco sphere, we don't say things like yank the crank.
All
okay?
right, excuse me. If this doesn't
explicit warning
excite your better nature and your video game appreciation, high-minded, et cetera,
Are we
et cetera.
calling it
No, you know what?
now?
Never mind. Just go back to yank the crank.
Whatever. Even if you don't get this game or don't like this game, I think it's important. It's a very important game in narrative first-person games. This was not by any means the first narrative first-person game. This came out the same year as Gone Home, and it's part of a revolution in sort of the indie game, narrative game space. But it's a very important part. This game, I mean, we've been saying, comes up constantly in discussions of first-person narrative storytelling in games because it did some things that were almost entirely new. I mean, they're not new under the sun because they're film techniques, but this is an example of, just smashing film techniques into a game and making the game better for it. Games can't take film techniques and make them work in the form of video games all the time. But this is an example of where it does work, and it's a pretty instructive one.
I mean, you need polished weirdo experiments. There's plenty of places for unpolished weirdo rawness to come out and for people to mine ideas out of. But something that's polished and has a little more vision behind it is really valuable because it's a fully conceived idea that's been thought through and it's still weird and experimental. I think that there is immense value in having a nugget like this out there. It has its place. We can't only let experimental games be done by beginners. If people do experiments and then they stop experimenting once they get known, it doesn't really work anymore. You need people who will experiment, who've got a couple games under their belt, who are going to keep bringing this kind of stuff to the table.
Yeah. Something I saw in a review that just like a line that I'm not even sure which review it was from, but something that I loved was, you've got to celebrate small games that do a small thing well. And this is a game that just absolutely nails one very small thing. This is not a revolution in game design exactly, but it just absolutely nails what it was trying for, which was bringing these like film storytelling techniques to a game in a way that still feels like it's enhancing the game experience. It's great. I love the way this game tells its story.
Yeah, and I know I've already hit on this a couple times, but I think just one of the things that makes it so successful is that it's not a surrealistic experience. It's a interpretive, interesting experience that is super fast, and you can go back to it. And I just think that's such an accomplishment. I think a lot of people would, when they're making a game like this, would fall back on, it's going to be weird, but it's weird, man, and it just like make it weird. But this is so precise. I think everything in it is intentional and purposeful to a T. And I think that makes it part of what, like you were saying, something that is small done incredibly well.
Yeah, precise is a great word.
And the only two times you have something surreal happen, it's at the wedding when the dancers float and you are wasted.
I was going to say, you could just say you're drunk.
It feels very like an emotional, it feels kind of like a thing happening in a movie where something will come to life because you're wasted. And then at the end when you're running out and then there's just this pink wash where the cop cars are, and it's very much like an adrenaline rush, or almost like a zombie game where like the things turn red when you're in rage mode. Like it makes sense when it does something weird. It has a narrative use. It's not just to be strange.
Right. It's not weird for the sake of weird or anything like that.
It's not realistic. I mean, this is an alternate world.
Totally.
It's and it's a funny world. Like, this is a game full of references to
Quesomancy.
And it's got things in it that are bizarre, but it's not. You're absolutely right. It's not surreal, which I think is a strength in this. It's very. It evokes a world that feels at least partly internally consistent and interesting in that way. And it's really also interesting that it's part of the same world as Blendo Games' other games. I love when things kind of begin assembling things that are maybe not explicit about their intent, or that don't do a whole lot of world building, but that build a world as part of a whole like network of things. This game takes place in the same world as several other games from Blendo Games that kind of build on each other and gives you this kind of meta sense of place that's really interesting.
I'm glad that we finally did this game for the show. So thank you to those who have recommended it to us, and it feels, we're coming off of and in between our IF comp coverage, which has been a ton of fun. But this felt like such a good little thing to sort of step over and play and experience. So if you've already played this game and you've been doing IF comp with us, go and play this game again.
Yeah, it was actually really nice for me to go back to it. I thought last time that I played through it was at least 3 years ago, I think, and it was great going back to it. So I absolutely recommend, if you haven't played this game, it's one of those sort of, if you're interested in narrative games, in short games, this is one of those sort of touch points that you will be glad that you've played. And if you have played this game before, boot it back up for a second. It takes 1 minute to download off of Steam, and it will take you 15 minutes to play through it again. And maybe you'll find something you didn't find before. Maybe you'll find something that I've never seen in it, because there are a lot of really cool details. If you find something if I missed a major thing here, or if I misinterpreted things, let me know.
Yeah, tweet at us. Let us know.
You've got 2 people who played the game today and someone who played the game 5 times.
Yeah.
Probably did miss something.
And if you do want to get in touch with us, you can find us on the web at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find all of our past episodes, and you'll find our contact form, which is a great way to let us know what you think about the show. Also, there's a link there to iTunes where you can leave us a review. We love it when people leave us reviews on iTunes, and it's one of those things that actually helps support the show. We don't do a Patreon or anything. So if you like the show and you're enjoying it, if you liked our IFComp coverage or anything else that we do, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can also email us at info@theshortgame.net, or find us on Twitter @_shortgame. And of course, you can find us individually on Twitter. I'm Reagan Kelly, and you can find me on Twitter @ReaganK. That's RayGank. Laura, where can people find you?
You can also find me on Twitter @LauraJNash.
And Nate, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter @NateSTL.
And thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I should say before we completely wrap up, our next episode will probably be a wrap-up of IF Comp, so join us next time for the final, hopefully we'll be talking about the results of the voting of IF Comp. So join us next time on the next episode of The Short Game.
Hey, we did the episode, and it's only 4 times the length it takes to play the game.